Hi, everyone, and welcome to ARBEST first webinar of 2025, Understanding Child Advocacy Centers and Child Abuse Investigations. My name is Laura Landers, and I'll be your webinar moderator for today. Before we get started, I just wanted to let you know a bit about the ARBEST program and do some housekeeping announcements. Arkansas Building Effective Services for Trauma, or ARBEST, is a state-funded program at the UAMS Psychiatric Research Institute, and our aim is to improve mental health services for children and families who've experienced trauma. We work closely with multiple partners to build a more trauma-informed state, and we're probably best known for providing training to mental health professionals on treatments that are effective with helping children and families recover from trauma. A few housekeeping announcements. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to type them into the chat and we'll answer them as we go along. You can also use the chat for any comments or responses. If you're interested in earning a CEU, just be sure to stick around to the very end and we'll give you some more instructions on how to obtain that. We're recording this webinar, which will be uploaded to the ARBEST YouTube channel. We have other previously recorded webinars there too, so check those out. And don't forget to like us on our ARBEST Facebook page. We frequently post upcoming webinars, training opportunities, and other resources there, so don't miss that. So today we have a wonderful presenter that I'm really excited about, Mark Bryant. Mark Bryant is the Clinical Services Director at Children's Protection Center. He leads a team providing mental health services and coordinated care to children and families involved in child maltreatment and abuse investigations. Mark has created community-based training targeting multidisciplinary teams, schools, and mental health agencies in trauma-informed care, mental health, human trafficking, and crisis intervention strategies. He has been a mental health therapist and licensed as a psychological examiner in Arkansas for over 23 years, providing psychotherapy services for children and families, including those with severe mental health problems, intense complex trauma, and problematic sexual behavior, as well as those in crisis. Mark has served on statewide councils, task force, and work groups initiated by the Governor of Arkansas and state agencies related to the prevention of child abuse, systems improvement, and human trafficking. He's been a member of the Pulaski County Multidisciplinary Team on Child Abuse and Maltreatment for over 12 years. And he's also a voting member on the Arkansas Human Trafficking Council. In these roles, he advocates for victims of trauma and provides mental health consultation to law enforcement and state agencies. Everyone, welcome Mark.
Hey, everybody. Let me get my presentation up. I really appreciate the opportunity to do this. I look forward to any opportunity I can have to really talk about Children's Protection Center. So, and to talk about the CACs. So you guys should be seeing my presentation. I'll just get started. I want to talk a little bit about kind of some of the things that we'll be talking about today, some of the goals, I guess, for this. I would like that everybody kind of comes away with this with a broader understanding of what a child advocacy center is. Identifying a multidisciplinary team and what the role is that multidisciplinary team is and how child advocacy centers kind of lead that system. And then also a little bit about how our system responds to child abuse here in Arkansas. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the disclosures of, or the dynamics of disclosure with child abuse as time permits. To begin with, so let's talk about what a child advocacy center is. We're essentially talking about a community-based facility that uses this multidisciplinary approach in how they talk about trauma and how they interact with other people that are responsible for investigating child abuse. So the idea is to create this like a center that is this collaborative model for how an entire system responds to child abuse. So in Arkansas, all our child advocacy centers are nonprofit organizations. Here at CPC, where I work, we're a nonprofit organization. This is based on a national model of child advocacy centers. So it's not something that we came up with here in Arkansas or anything like that. This is a national model. It uses evidence-based practices and how we collaborate and how we provide services to families. So I've got a map here where we can look at these are the CACs across the state. There's a website. That website's for our state chapter. You can go to that website and find out uh, where your local CAC is, who your local CAC is. I'm here in the center at Children's Protection Center in Pulaski County. So we serve only Pulaski County. You'll see from the map that there are multiple centers. We've got 17 different organizations in the state, and some of those organizations cover multiple counties. So we just cover Pulaski County here at Children's Protection Center, but a lot of areas in the state will cover multiple counties. So I want to talk a little bit about, I guess, more about Children's Protection Center here because this is the center I know the most about. I do lead our mental health committee with our state chapters, so we routinely, have interactions with other centers. So most of the things that I'll say here are going to be applicable to all the CACs across the state. There may be a few things though that we talk about that may be a little bit different here at CPC than maybe another center in the state. So this is our mission statement here at CPC, providing a safer community for children. We lead the coordinated response to child abuse, providing hope and healing to families. A few facts about CPC. Um, just kind of looking at who we are. So we're, like I said before, a nonprofit organization. We've been around since 2007. We are not DHS. So a lot of people get that confused. CPC sounds a lot like CPS, which people associate that term CPS with DHS. We are not a part of DHS. We are not a state agency. We are a nonprofit organization. We are, however, written into all the CACs in the state are written into Arkansas legislation regarding child maltreatment. So some of the child maltreatment codes are a little bit different than some of the other laws, which are criminal laws, which may govern child abuse. But basically, where we're written in child maltreatment codes is that our investigators in these cases, it kind of compels them to bring a child to a child advocacy center when there's a child abuse investigation. Um, all the child advocacy centers here in Arkansas provide services at no cost to families. So we're nonprofits. We fundraise and all that stuff. We work from grants that we have, but we don't charge anybody anything for services. We don't bill insurance or anything like that for the services that we provide. Um, so why do CACs exist? I mean, like I said, we've been here since 2007 in Pulaski County, um, but um, but we were investigating child abuse way before 2007. So why did this system come in? So CACs and the model of CACs were really brought in to address a few issues that were being seen and how child abuse investigations were being handled. And I'll cover a few of those. Um, so one of them is a lack of communication. So There's a lot of different organizations, which you'll see in a minute, that actually could be involved in a child abuse investigation. So it's not just the police department, local police department, or it's not just the FBI or state police or DHS. In most of these cases, there are multiple organizations that are involved in this. So the idea too, when you want to provide services too, is that we also want service providers connected in that. And that's part of where the CACs come in. So when we talk about having a multidisciplinary team and these different agencies involved in child abuse investigations, the Child Advocacy Center in your area is who is leading that multidisciplinary team. So they're the ones that are facilitating that communication between these organizations. Most of the organizations that are part of these investigations, may have a history of, of kind of, just working within their organization and not doing a lot of interaction or communication with other organizations. And so that's where part of where the CAC comes in with that. Um, we also know that historically there's been a lack of collaboration too. There's a lot of things that we see in child abuse investigations historically, things like a child being interviewed multiple times, failure to follow through by some organizations or agencies. Families and victims can get confused about the process. There's a lot of misinformation. This is I can't underscore how hugely complicated this process is. So, I was a therapist, I think, for, maybe over 10 years before I really got a good understanding of the Child Advocacy Center system and what it is. I have made multiple hotline reports before. I have met investigators when they followed through with the hotline reports that I made, but where that happened after that, like I had no understanding of that process. So it's a very confusing system. And so part of the role of a CAC is to make sure that victims and their families get an understanding of that system, know how to navigate that system, have help navigating that system. So there's also been a lack of understanding of different agencies, not knowing the roles of other agencies. And we'll talk a little bit in a minute about how, what some of the roles state police have in child abuse investigations and what some of the roles DHS will have in child abuse investigations. Well, I mean, these are agencies that don't, understand the systems in the other agencies. And so part of what we do too is CACs help kind of bridge that understanding. Um, but really one of the main reasons that CACs are here is to, help provide a more trauma-informed approach to how child abuse is investigated, to how we treat children during that process, how we offer services to that child and that family. So I'll talk a little bit about like what the system looked like um, before we had CACs. So I've got a couple of graphics here. I'm not going to read these graphics, but essentially what might happen is a child reported child abuse, and that child would basically go to all these different places and have to essentially retell their story. So the child discloses at school and the hotline's called and an investigator responds and maybe the police is called too. So there are multiple investigators involved in this process that a child may talk to. They talk to a counselor. They have to go somewhere for medical treatment and talk to someone there. They have to talk to maybe prosecutors if this is a criminal offense that ends up going to court and needing to be prosecuted. So there were all these different people that a child might have to talk to when they disclose child abuse, which we know is not trauma informed at all and is re-traumatizing actually to a child. Um, After CACs are meant to be, the single location where this investigation may happen. So it's a place where everybody comes together. So the families come to us, the investigators come to us. We have services, medical is on site, mental health is on site, advocates, the interviews, all those things happen in this one location so that children can come once and have this be able to talk to a trained interviewer, and that interview can then be recorded. Sometimes the prosecutors come here for this, and that interview can be recorded so that when that case gets ready and maybe goes to prosecution, that child's not having to retell everything or talk about every detail as they prepare to go to court too. So who is it that actually investigates child abuse? So, a lot of people on this I know are probably really familiar with calling the child abuse hotline. So you call the child abuse hotline typically, and you report child abuse. And then the child abuse hotline then determines whether that meets this criteria that they have. And then they decide what level of criteria it meets. And then it essentially goes to one of two agencies. It's either going to go to the state police for investigation, or it's going to go to DHS for investigation when you call the hotline. So with the state police, we're talking about um, the Crimes Against Children Division of Arkansas State Police. We refer to it as CACD. So these are specialized investigators. These are civilian investigators, though. They're not police officers. They don't carry, firearms or anything like that. These are civilian investigators that have some specialized training in investigating child abuse and child maltreatment. Typically, the reports that would go to the state police are more severe reports of sexual abuse, physical abuse when there was maybe an injury, whether that was, a burn or suffocation or a fracture, head injuries, those kind of things. Anything that is a near fatality, or also investigations of child death, all those would go to CACD investigations with Arkansas State Police. Now, CACD is just there to perform an investigation. They don't provide services. They have no power to remove children from their parents' custody or anything like that. They actually cannot make arrests. CACD cannot bring criminal charges. Those are all up to local law enforcement agencies or federal law enforcement agencies to determine whether a criminal law has been broken and that person needs to be arrested or prosecuted. So the CACD investigator is essentially looking at all the facts to determine whether they believe this is a true finding. If that investigator then believes it's a true finding, then the offender in that case, their name actually goes on what we call the Child Maltreatment Registry. Um, so we can talk a little bit about the child maltreatment registry later. Um, but that's essentially the limits of what they have. Now, CACD can also call in DHS if there is a safety concern and maybe they don't feel like this child needs to still be in the home with the family. They would then call in DHS or DCFS. So DCFS they could be called in by the state police, like I said, but they could also get an investigation from the child abuse hotline. So DCFS is a division of DHS um, that really focuses on anything that involves children and families. So they investigate usually less severe forms of child maltreatment or child abuse, physical abuse where maybe there wasn't an injury or an obvious injury, cases of neglect, cases of drug endangerment, those kind of things. Now, DCFS actually provides services to families. So they have a lot of internal programs where they can offer all kinds of different services. Their goal is typically always working towards reunification. So, so even in situations where they might remove a child from a parent's custody or place a child into foster care or the home of a relative or something like that, their goal is typically always to work back to reunification. So, and when they do those removals, a lot of people don't understand. So a judge is involved in that. So DCFS has the power to make these removals, but then they have to take all the information that they know in front of a judge, usually within a couple of days of that removal, and then make that case to a judge to see whether a judge will uphold that removal. So they're not really an agency that's out there acting on their own or anything like that. So there are a couple of other ways that investigation might come to a CAC too. So we do a lot of investigations with the FBI, and sometimes other federal agencies like Homeland Security and things like that. Um, so those would be criminal investigations, typically with the FBI. It would most of the cases that we end up working with the FBI usually involve sex trafficking. It usually involves like sextortion or something that like happened over online. They sometimes involve cases where there are like multiple victims, things like that. And then we also work cases with local law enforcement agencies. So here in Pulaski County, we work with every law enforcement agency in Pulaski County. So Little Rock PD, North Little Rock PD, Sherwood, Jacksonville, Maumelle, all these different Pulaski County Sheriff's Office, all these different law enforcement agencies. So these sometimes are child abuse reports that may not go through the child abuse hotline. So these would be reports that police picked up or situations too that they're involved in where maybe a child has witnessed a crime too. We get a lot of cases like that, at least here in Pulaski County. So if LRPD, for instance, responded to a homicide and when they went into the house, there was a child in that home. I mean, they're typically going to take that child, put them in a car with an officer, and bring them straight here. So we see a lot of investigations that kind of work like that too, where maybe there's been a crime committed and the child was maybe witnessed the crime or in the home when it happened or something like that. So we work a lot of investigations like that too. And these other agencies like state police, CACD, or DHS can also refer cases to local law enforcement. So if state police finds this case is true and they feel like a crime's been committed, they're going to refer that to local law enforcement. And then it's up to local law enforcement to decide whether that meets the definition of the criminal code and they're actually going to bring criminal charges. And then they would put a case together, investigate, put a case together on their end, and then submit that case to the prosecutor's office. So to talk a little bit about this multidisciplinary team, the multidisciplinary team is really, the backbone of how these investigations operate. So, I just mentioned a lot of law enforcement agencies or state agencies with DHS. All those agencies are part of our multidisciplinary team. We maintain the communication between those different agencies typically. Um, so we also work with attorneys ad litem that are involved in these cases, other mental health agencies, Arkansas Children's Hospital and the medical team there. You know, they are huge partners of ours. We're actually located on their campus. Uh, our home center is anyway. And then the prosecutor's office. The prosecutor's office is a huge partner that we have, that we want them to be involved in these cases, especially the more severe cases from the very beginning till the end when we get ready to prosecute. So what exactly do CACs do? And by the way, this is a picture. This is Gigi. She is her family support a specialist at CPC. She's sort of the one that's kind of responsible for maintaining all the families they're taking care of while they're here. You know, trauma-informed care is the cornerstone of really what we're doing here. And part of that is just making sure that families are comfortable, that families are taken care of, that everybody leaves here, surprised by what happened. Everybody comes here not knowing what to expect, and they leave here thinking, wow, that was way better than what I thought it was. Um, so what the CACs do is they coordinate that MDT, like I was saying earlier. They also offer, pretty much four core programs, and that is forensic interviewing, advocacy, mental health, and then medical services also. And then they also do community awareness, and there's prevention programs and other things like that. But really, those four core programs are really most of what your CAC is doing. So I'm going to break down kind of what happens in those programs. I know there's probably some of these programs which people are familiar with, like mental health and maybe advocacy too. But there's other things like forensic interviewing, which is really people don't have a full understanding of really what that program is. Um, so let's talk about forensic interview. So a forensic interview is a structured, child-centered conversation that a trained forensic interviewer is having with a child. So we so what happens with that is there is a narrative. It's an open-ended narrative of questions. Um, and the child essentially is leading that conversation. So it is a trauma sensitive conversation that we're having. The child has the ability to stop that conversation at any time. It allows the child to tell the story in a way that's not threatening, a way that may feel safer. Um, this this conversation is audio and video recorded, and the child is aware that the conversation is being audio and video recorded, but also the cameras in the room are kind of structured in a way where they're not obvious, where it doesn't feel overwhelming to a child. Um, the forensic interviewer is actually a person that's employed by the Child Advocacy Center. So what's happening are these investigators that are working this case are here, but they're watching this interview from a different room, watching it live. So most cases with child abuse, if they're done appropriately, um, it's usually a trained forensic interviewer that's a neutral person in a child advocacy center that's actually interviewing the child, and not like a police detective or, a DHS worker or some other type of investigator. So this is what's accepted as best practice. Um, our forensic interviewers are trained in a protocol called Child First. It's a national protocol. It's an evidence-based protocol for how you talk to children about child abuse. They go through like rigorous training. Then they go through this process of peer review throughout their time as a forensic interviewer. So there's a lot of things to put in place to make sure we keep those skills sharp. The idea of this is we want to reduce the number of times that a child has to be interviewed. We want to be able to reduce that trauma that happens, that re-traumatization for a child being interviewed over and over again. We also know that when we do it in this way, we get more detailed disclosures. We get more reliable disclosures. And we're also creating a person that is able to then go to court and act as an expert witness for just that disclosure. Somebody that's not involved in any of the other parts of the investigation, but someone that can just go to court and use their training and expertise to testify as an expert witness. So family advocacy is another program that we have here. Advocacy is in our name, so it's kind of um, a main part of what we do here. So the advocate is typically a social worker. The advocate is typically somebody who is guiding the family through this entire process. They're connecting the family to services in the community. That could be food, that could be shelter, um, clothing resources, connecting them to legal services is something we do a lot, helping sometimes with immigration issues. Those are all things that really that our advocates do on a regular basis. The advocates then continue to track the case after the child leaves the CAC. So so they're tracking that case, they're following up with families. Obviously, we see a lot of families that when they come in, they're completely overwhelmed. So we see a lot of families that may not really realize the services that they necessarily need the day they come to the advocacy center. So we're continuing to follow up with that family and see what those needs are. Our advocates sometimes go to court on these cases too, and just to support the family, just to sometimes go to court or go to those hearings or go to that trial and just sit with the family and support them through this process. The advocate's also the person that may make sure that they're staying on the investigators to keep the families updated about, what's happening on this case too. Mental health is obviously I run our mental health program here at CPC. So our mental health program, the mental health is something that may differ, but it's probably the program that's most different between different CACs in the state. So our mental health program here at CPC focuses heavily on trauma assessments and us determining whether this kid needs mental health services, what type of mental health services that child could benefit from. We do a lot of crisis intervention here. I mean, obviously, we see kids that are overwhelmed. We see parents that are overwhelmed with what's happening. We work with a lot of teenagers, so that means we work with a lot of suicidal ideation. And so our staff are trained really well to deal with those kind of issues, and we deal with them pretty much on a daily basis. We also provide support groups for families that come through CPC. So we do trauma therapy here. So our clinicians are trained in TFCBT. Our clinicians are also trained in an up and coming treatment called CFTSI, which has proven really beneficial. It's a short-term treatment for working with children and families like right after the trauma happens. So that's one of the newer interventions that we're using. CPT, a lot of different interventions. So, and also the therapist then becomes a part of that team that is kind of working the investigation. The therapist is working alongside the forensic interviewer and the advocate and the medical person and the investigator and the prosecutor and all these other people. So the therapist can kind of help to be that link to explaining and making sure that especially these other agencies outside the CAC have this understanding of trauma and understanding of maybe why this child's reacting a certain way. We support families through the prosecution process also. We've got one of our therapists is going to court to sit with a victim in the coming weeks. We do a lot of expert testimony. We do a lot of expert testimony about disclosure of child abuse, a lot of expert testimony about trauma and how trauma impacts kids and things like that. So medical is kind of that final fourth like core component uh, to a CAC. Medical is really interesting. So they're typically what we call SANE nurses or sexual assault nurse examiners, or they're medical doctors. Here at CPC, we're on Children's Hospital's campus, so we work with a clinic called TCAR, the Team for Children at Risk. They are the team that sort of oversees medical at all the CACs in the state. And these are specialized pediatricians, SANE nurses, nurse practitioners that have this deep training in child abuse. So some of what they can do is really fascinating. They know a lot about the research behind, certain types of fractures and the explanation or the that a parent might give for that child having that fracture and whether that could happen. Lots of different things. About 30% of the cases that we see, at least here at CPC, typically involve medical exams. And in those medical exams, they're gathering a lot of evidence that will be used to bring charges, a lot of evidence that could be used in prosecution, sometimes evidence that can just be used when they go to court to keep these children out of the custody of the parent that may have committed the abuse. They testify a lot in court as medical experts. Um, they test for STIs, but one of the real gems I think in medical too is this idea too of helping confirm to kids that they're safe and that their bodies are healthy. So a lot of the medical exams that happen are these medical exams because pretty much everybody's offered a medical exam. And a lot of it is to just reassure children and parents a lot of times that they're safe and that their bodies are healthy. So I'm going to look at a few kind of myths that we see a lot. Um, So one of those, and we hear this a lot. We hear this a lot from defense attorneys. Obviously, we hear this sometimes from law enforcement or other people. We hear this from parents a lot. And one of the things that we see is the victim can't get their story straight. So this kid disclosed to this person, but they didn't disclose to this other person over here, or they disclosed, but it was a long time. They disclosed the abuse, but it was a long time later. And so if something really happened to you, you would tell immediately. What we know is that delayed reporting, pressure to recant that, or the inability to recall details of abuse is very common. In fact, it's more common than it's not. So let me explain a little bit about disclosures. So what we know about disclosures, and we've got research on children disclosing child abuse. What we know is most victims of childhood abuse never disclose that child abuse. Um, and then what we know is when they do disclose, that it's more likely to happen in adulthood. So then after that, it's most likely to be what we call delayed disclosure. And a delayed disclosure would be a disclosure that would be happen over a month or more after the abuse happened. So so most of the disclosures that we get from child abuse are delayed. Um, in fact, the research shows anywhere between 45 and 75% of kids either delayed disclosure over a year or they never told at all. So, so I mean, that's a huge percentage over a year. So this idea of, children, telling the abuse, running to tell immediately after it happened. We just know that research just doesn't show that that happens. Um, Most of the expert witness testimony that we end up doing is usually on explaining delayed disclosures to juries. We know that children are more likely to disclose when they have parents that support them. The most significant factor in a child disclosing is a positive relationship with the parent. And there's a lot of reasons why kids don't disclose. So, kids worry about upsetting the family. Kids worry about upsetting their parents, breaking apart the family. Kids worry about being believed. Like that is a huge thing. They worry about, I'm going to say this and people aren't going to believe me. Um, and they worry about consequences that may occur if they talk about what had happened. So there's a lot of things that happen. We see a lot of situations too where we get like really firm disclosures that are solid disclosures, and then those kids recant those disclosures later. And a lot of that happens from internal pressure from the family, where it's like maybe there's people that don't believe in the home. Maybe, the breaking apart the family feels like it was worse than you thought it was going to be. Maybe, uh, the offender who has now left the home, it's causing stress within the home financially or emotionally or whatever for the other parent. I mean, there's a lot of different reasons why, somebody might recant child abuse. So another common thing that we see is like, oh, this kid just isn't acting like someone who has been abused. We really like in our culture in our society to create these like victim profiles where it's like this is what a victim does. This is what somebody who's been the victim of child abuse would go through. And essentially what we know is that there's no normal trauma response. Like you can't say, oh, this is normal. We know trauma affects people extremely differently. So trauma is defined by the individual who experiences it. There's so many things that go in effect there. So we can't say that there's this like typical victim profile that it's like, okay, if a child during their forensic interview is crying and upset, that's a typical victim profile, and we can say this definitely happened. But if the child in the forensic interview is acting inappropriate or has inappropriate laughter or whatever, no, a child wouldn't do that. Like those things just aren't true. We know people respond to trauma in different ways. CAC spend a lot of time, especially the mental health arm of a CAC, explaining trauma, doing trainings on trauma for other members of the multidisciplinary team. We do a lot of trainings for law enforcement and other partners, prosecutors, people like that, to kind of explain how, trauma impacts people and why something might come out with these particular behaviors or these emotional reactions. We also do expert witness testimony about trauma too. Okay, so I'm going to speed things up just a little bit, but the other myth that we see a lot is, oh, there wasn't this, the victim didn't fight back. So there's again this like typical victim profile. Well, what we actually know from the research is that most victims don't physically resist. Most victims don't sustain injury, and even in sexual assault. So what we see on most of the medical exams that we do is most of the medical exams end up being quote normal. That there's not necessarily obvious signs of trauma in those medical exams, and it doesn't mean something didn't happen. Like a normal exam is normal. In a case of child sexual abuse. Um, so what happens next? We go through this investigative process. They come to a CAC and they get these services and things like that. The investigators do their thing. Like I said, there's a Arkansas Child Maltreatment Registry, and your name can go on that essentially just by that investigator saying, "I believe this happened." So when that process happens, essentially that's sort of a list that's held by DCFS that basically can flag on a background check. So if you were applying for a job that worked with children or something like that, your name would be flagged and they likely would not hire you. There's not a lot of other penalties beyond that, other than that just being something that will flag on a background check. Arrest and prosecution, like I said, would have to go through a local or a federal law enforcement agency. Um, there are a lot of these cases end up going to prosecution. Prosecution takes a really long time in a lot of these cases. One of the role of the CAC is to help however we can, whether it's bridging prosecution and mental health services and disclosures and explaining to them and how we can maybe even go to court and act as expert witness testimonies to help get convictions on these. We spend a lot of time doing that. By the way, in the background there, that is Simone. That is our facility dog here at CPC. Well, I don't know if I'd say most, but a lot of child advocacy centers here in Arkansas have what we call facility dogs. So a facility dog is similar to a therapy dog. Um, a facility dog is essentially considered like an employee of your agency, though, and may actually free roam. They're also called courthouse dogs. So a lot of people may know them. Facility dogs can go to court and sit with kids when they testify in court and things like that. So that is Simone. She is our facility dog. The CACs also work to guide families through the process. I mean, I'm sure as y'all picked up by now that this is a very complicated process. It involves a lot of different people. So a family usually ends this process with like a stack of business cards because you've got them from the staff at your CAC and the investigator with the police department and then the prosecutor and then the person with state police CACD and maybe DHS is involved in it. I mean, it can completely be an overwhelming process for the family. So that's something that's really important that they have people there that can kind of explain this process and what it looks like. I want to invite everybody to collaborate with us. So, so we're not this insular organization. We want to expand. We want to work with other people that are already working with the victims that we see. So what that means is, no, you can't come and watch the forensic interview. I can't give you details about the investigation or necessarily details about like what the child disclosed. I can't make sure the hotline investigates things or the different state agencies. Like we can't do those things, but we can collaborate. We can give you information about what's happening with your clients. For instance, if you're a therapist seeing this client or someone that may have a therapist that may have made that hotline report. We can connect you with the family advocate who's working this case if that family needs additional services and things like that. You know, we can connect you with others involved in the case, like the DCFS caseworkers, or maybe explain the progress on the case and where we're at, or what's going to kind of happen with that. So those are ways we love to collaborate with mental health providers. We love to collaborate with outside advocacy groups. Like there's a lot of advocacy groups on the human trafficking cases that we work that we really want to collaborate with, and we do on a regular basis. There's limitations to that collaboration, but we definitely want to collaborate. Um, Again, just so everybody knows, this is the map of the CACs across the state. It is on that website, our state chapter's website. We all have relationships. We all love to work with people in the community. So if you're interested in finding out more about your CAC, give them a call. If you're here in Pulaski County, reach out to me. We can come do a tour. Like we literally do tours every other day here. We love to, especially like I said, mental health providers. Like we don't see a lot of kids here for therapy. Most of what we do in Pulaski County is refer to people in the community, people that are trained in trauma, people that that want to work with kids that have been victims of trauma. So we love creating that relationships, and I would love to meet people, to have people show up, to give them tours of CPC, and let them meet the rest of our mental health team and talk about working together. So that's what I've got for you. This is my contact information. Um, I my cell phone number, my email address, a gratuitous picture of me and Simone, our facility dog. I just want to encourage people if they want more information, if you want me to try to connect you to somebody in your local CAC, I would certainly be willing to do that. So again, I mean, thank you guys for taking the time to learn more about us, and I'm definitely open to any questions anyone might have.
Thanks, Mark. I am not seeing too many questions in the chat. Someone asked if we could post a list of the addresses of the CAC offices, so I went ahead and shared that link with them.
Yeah, okay, great.
Just giving it another couple of minutes to see if
Yeah,
we
sure.
have any questions.
Sure. And if you go to that link, like, yes, it'll show that same map that I showed you and give you details of where your CAC is located and what it's like. Anybody that is interested, particularly mental health wise and working at a CAC, let me know. Yeah, because I know there are a lot of different CACs across the state that are hiring.
Thank you for your time today, Mark.
Absolutely.
Let me just share about how people can earn a CEU for this webinar. So after the webinar, you'll receive a link to a survey via email. The code for today's survey is 7110. I'll go ahead and put that in the chat, but that code will be entered into the survey when it's prompted. And then once you've submitted that survey, a CEU link will be sent to you. Please remember that we can only give CEUs out to people who are watching this webinar live, and that the formatting of the survey works best for a computer and not a mobile device. Thank you, Mark, for your time, and for everyone for attending today. We'll stay on for another couple of minutes in case anyone has any questions, but please feel free to check out our Facebook page and sign up for any email notifications to receive more information about upcoming webinars. Thanks, everyone. I hope you have a good day. We've got someone here. Emily has said, did you say people can be put on the child maltreatment list just if they are suspected of abuse?
So it's interesting. So it not necessarily suspected. So essentially it would have to go through an investigative process with state police, CACD. So that investigator, at the end of that investigation, has to determine whether there is, the term they use is a preponderance of evidence that this happened. It is totally up to that one investigator. Well, I mean, within the rules they have to make that decision. So preponderance of evidence is basically defined as you believe it's more likely to have happened than not happened, which I know is a really low bar. And so if that happens and they find that case true, then typically, because people who've made reports are probably used to getting in the mail these things that later that say, oh, this was found true or unsubstantiated. And if that case is found true and they've got a particular offender identified, then yes, that name will just automatically go to the child maltreatment list. Now, people that go to that list also have an opportunity to appeal that decision. Now, when you appeal that decision, it doesn't go in front of a regular judge. It goes in front of what they call a DHS magistrate. So it's kind of like a court within DHS. I know it's a complicated process, but it's not quite the same. So a lot of findings that are that people that go on the child maltreatment list appeal it and get it overturned on appeal.
Thank you. We have one more question. How common is it for a child to recant each time something is reported? They may report new information each time, but recant when an investigator speaks with them again and again. I have felt helpless in this situation before.
Yeah. So, so recanting is typical, especially in a situation where there is pressure from inside the family. Um, Most of the cases where I've testified as expert witnesses on, they call me for expert witness, usually in a lot of cases where there's been a recantation, and a child's recanted. And because the defense attorney is saying, this child recanted, clearly it didn't happen, right? And but what we know is when you're in a situation where your allegation broke apart the family and now the family's fractured and there's half the people that believe the offender and there's half the people that don't, and that your disclosure is bringing like a lot of pressure on your mom, or other people that care about you. For a lot of these kids, it's just easier to say, I made it up, it didn't happen. And so we see a lot. I don't know that actual statistic right offhand, but yeah, we see a lot of recantation to the point that I would say recanting child abuse is a pretty normal occurrence. And just because you recant does not mean it did not happen. We know that. But I totally understand the frustration. I think law enforcement, the people that investigate these, totally on the same page. It's really frustrating working cases where you know something happened, but the child doesn't disclose, or the child has disclosed, but they recant that. And we see that a lot. Because a lot of these cases, there's other evidence that can corroborate that this actually happened beyond just the child saying it happened or didn't happen. And prosecutors sometimes are still willing to prosecute cases where a child recants, at least here in Pulaski County.
That's very interesting. Casey said very frustrating. She kept disclosing to me, but never to investigators. It was a case of sibling sexual abuse. Thank you. Very insightful.
Yeah.
Um, Mark, do you happen to have that list of openings and applications? Would you know where an easy way to access that? Because if not, I can email, but I have someone asking about, you said the list of openings for CSEs.
So I don't know that we have kind of a statewide list. So for instance, here in Pulaski County, I currently do not have an opening. We just filled our position here. I probably will next year, or next fiscal year at least. The What I think the best place to start, because I mean, I'm telling you, if you go to the state chapter's website, you find the CAC in your area and you reach out to them directly and ask them about positions, either advocacy positions or mental health positions. Usually an advocacy position is typically a bachelor's level. Bachelor's level, it doesn't have to be a social worker, but a lot of them are bachelor's level social workers. And then, for mental health, they're looking for licensed mental health professionals. It is, I mean, I will put a plug because I love this system. It is extremely hard work. You encounter tons of secondary trauma, but it can really be like some of the most rewarding work you'll ever do as a therapist. So,
I imagine. Oh, well, thank you for joining us today, Mark. I think that's about all the questions that we've got. Really appreciate your time.
absolutely. Thank y'all so much. And thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.